When my son finally made the decision, I didn't say a word, but that silence cost me more than any scream I could have let out. My name is Helena. I am 58 years old, and for a long time, I was called cold, proud, distant. They said I didn't fight for my son, that I accepted everything silently, that I seemed not to care. But no one knew what that silence really meant. I remained silent by choice, not out of fear, not out of weakness, and certainly not out of lack of love. I remained silent because I needed to see something clearly. I needed to see who my son would choose. When no one was pressuring him, demanding things from him, or crying in front of him. For months, I watched my name being avoided. I saw invitations arrive incomplete. Important dates were decided without me. I saw embarrassed glances, quick responses, excuses that didn't hold up. And even so, I didn't say anything. Inside it hurt. It hurt like only a mother knows how to hurt. But I knew that if I opened my mouth, everything would change artificially. He would choose out of pity, out of guilt, out of obligation. And I didn't want that. I needed the naked truth, a clean choice, a decision that comes when no one is begging. Many have asked me, aren't you going to say anything? Are you going to accept this in silence? Aren't you going to fight for your place? And I simply responded with the same silence. Because, deep down, I knew that moment wasn't about me. It was about the man I created, regarding the values he absorbed, regarding the limits he recognized, regarding the love he understood as a priority. When the decision finally came, I was sitting down. I took a deep breath. I felt my heart pounding, as if it wanted to escape from my chest. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't interrupt. I didn't cry in front of him. I just listened. And in that instant, I understood something that changed everything within me. Silence doesn't protect, but it reveals, because that choice would say everything about him, about me, and about the kind of bond that truly existed between us. I became a mother long before I learned to be a whole woman. My son arrived when I was still learning to stand on my own 2 feet, when life had already taught me that love often comes with abandonment. I raised him practically alone. His father left early, like someone closing a door without looking back. And I stayed. I stayed with a baby in my arms, fear in my chest, and a silent promise made in the middle of the night. You will never feel like you're not chosen. I worked double shifts. I gave up dreams, vanities, and rest. There were days when I slept sitting up, just to make sure he could breathe peacefully. There were nights when I cried softly so as not to scare him. But in front of him, I was strength. Always. I taught values through actions, not speeches. I taught respect by observing how I treated others. I taught dignity by showing that one doesn't beg for love. And above all, I taught freedom. Perhaps that was my biggest mistake, or my greatest success, because I never tried to tie my son to me. I never resorted to emotional blackmail. I never used phrases like, after everything I've done for you. I never wanted him to choose me out of guilt. But this came from a very ancient place within me. Before becoming a mother, I had already been the woman who begged to stay, the one who diminished herself to fit into someone's love, the one who accepted crumbs thinking they were all she deserved. I was replaced. I was abandoned. I was forgotten. And at that time, I made a promise to myself. With the same strength with which I promised to protect my son, I will never again beg to be chosen. As he grew up, I encouraged him to live, to love, to make mistakes, to learn. I wanted him to be whole, not dependent. I wanted him to choose consciously, not out of obligation. But loving like that comes at a price. When he met that woman, I felt something change. It wasn't jealousy, it was intuition. In the beginning, there were small things. An invitation that never arrived, a cancelled lunch, a snide comment, silence on the other end of the line. I knew it. I always knew it. But I chose not to confront him. Not because it didn't hurt, it hurt too much. But because I needed to know who he was when no one was pressuring him. People were saying, "You're losing your son. She's pushing you away. You need to react." And perhaps they were right. But reacting would mean interfering. And interfering would erase the truth. I had lived long enough to understand one thing. Forced love turns into resentment. And bonds sustained by guilt rot with time. So I remained silent. Not an empty silence. A silence filled with pain, memories, sleepless nights, and questions I didn't ask aloud. I needed to see, I needed to feel, I needed to know. Because, deep down, that story wasn't just about my son. It was about the woman I became after being broken, and the mother I chose to be so I wouldn't break anyone else. And it was there, in that fragile place between love and dignity, that I decided I would not repeat my story, even if it cost me everything. My son was already an adult when things really started to change. He had his own life, his own job, his own dreams, and I always respected that. I was never the kind of mother who intrudes, who calls all the time, who demands my presence. I learned early on that love also means giving space. At the beginning of his relationship, I even tried to get closer. I invited her to lunch. I asked how she was doing. I smiled more than I should have. She was always polite, never rude, but cold in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. Visits began to decrease. Important dates became complicated. Holidays, once certain, became uncertain. Mom, it won't work today. We'll reschedule later. She doesn't feel very comfortable. I listened to everything in silence. I noticed that my name was being avoided in conversations, that my messages were going unanswered for longer periods, that when I called, my son answered too quickly, as if he needed to end the conversation quickly. There were little things that hurt more than big fights. A family photo where I wasn't present. A birthday celebrated without me. A decision made without even telling me. And the most painful part, I realized he knew. And yet he accepted it. People around me saw it. Friends commented. Relatives were outraged. She's pushing you away. That's not normal. You need to talk to him. And perhaps any other mother would have spoken up. Perhaps she would have cried, demanded, insisted on space. Perhaps she would have remembered everything she did, everything she gave up. But I didn't do any of that. Because, deep down, I knew, if I interfered, the choice wouldn't be his. It would be mine. I started living a strange routine. On the outside, everything was normal. Work, home, appointments. On the inside, a constant state of alert. Every invitation that never came. Every absence that was over-explained. Every prolonged silence. I felt the distance growing, like someone watching the tide rise without being able to hold the water in their hands. Sometimes he would show up. Quick, polite, guilty. Is everything all right, Mom? Of course, I replied. And I really was. Just the way I was able to be. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I needed to be honest with myself. If I pressured him, maybe he would give in. If I cried, maybe he would back down. If I played the victim, maybe he would stay. But I didn't want to be chosen out of pity, nor out of guilt, nor out of obligation. I wanted to know who he was when no one was pulling his arm. So I kept quiet, an active silence, attentive, painful. Each day was a confirmation or a warning. Each of his choices was a sign. And inside me, a question grew, heavy as a stone in my chest. How far will he go if I don't say anything? I knew there was no turning back from that path. I knew that when the truth came out, there would be no way to unsee it. But I also knew something else. I've survived worse things than losing hope. If it was going to hurt, let it hurt truly. And so it was, living through this daily silence, that I arrived at the moment when he would need to choose. Without pushing, without speeches, without interference. Only him, and the consequences of whatever he decided. The moment of choice didn't arrive with shouting, nor with fights, nor with doors slamming. It arrived in a way that was too simple for something so definitive. It was an important date. One of those that, for years, has always been sacred in our family. Not for the event itself, but for its meaning, presence, belonging, bond. I knew that date would be different even before he said anything. The way he avoided the subject, the exaggerated care with his words, the restrained manner of someone who has already decided, but hasn't yet had the courage to admit it. Mom, we need to talk. These words always carry a strange weight when they come from an adult child, because it's no longer a request for affection. It's an announcement of change. He explained calmly. He said there was a scheduling conflict, that she didn't feel comfortable, that it would be better to leave it for another time. I listened to everything without interrupting. I nodded. I took a deep breath. Inside, something began to give way. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but it was the first time it was so clear that a line was being drawn, and that, this time, someone would be left out. The people around noticed. The atmosphere changed. Someone cleared their throat. Another person tried to change the subject. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. They expected me to say something, to remember who I was, to set boundaries, to demand respect. They were expecting the classic role of the hurt mother, but I didn't do any of that. I remained silent. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of thoughts that no one there could hear. I thought about the sleepless nights, the fears I swallowed alone, the days I chose to be strong when everything inside me wanted to crumble. I thought about every time I put his well-being above my pride. And I thought, above all, about the promise I made to myself many years before, never again to beg for love. He kept talking, justifying, over-explaining. The more he spoke, the more I understood that the decision had already been made. He just needed me not to make things difficult, and I didn't make it difficult. Okay, I said finally. 2 simple words, but they echoed in the room in a strange way. He looked at me surprised, maybe expecting resistance, maybe expecting tears, maybe expecting a speech. None of that happened. It was there that the silence began to bother more than any discussion. Because silence forces the other person to confront their own choice without distractions. I saw the discomfort on his face. I saw the guilt trying to hide behind rationality. I saw the relief mixed with shame. And I stayed there, present, whole, inside. It hurt in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of anticipatory grief. Because, at that moment, I understood that it was no longer about a date, nor an event, nor a specific conflict. It was a priority. Priorities are not up for discussion. They are observed. When he left, the house became too quiet. A different kind of silence from the one I had been cultivating. Heavier, more definitive. I sat alone and stayed there, staring at some random point on the wall, trying to organize the turmoil inside me. I haven't cried. Not yet. Because, at that moment, something very clear formed in my chest. If I had reacted, if I had fought, if I had demanded, I would never know if he was there out of love or because of pressure. And at that moment, however painful it was, I needed the truth. Raw, unvarnished. That's when I understood that silence also hurts. But unlike a scream, it reveals something. It reveals who stays when no one holds them back. It reveals who chooses when no one pushes them away. It reveals who we are when there is no interference. And so it was, without raising my voice, without shedding a tear in front of anyone, that I went through the most decisive moment of my life as a mother. I knew that, after that day, nothing would be the same. I knew that something was being broken or confirmed. And I accepted that. Because some truths only come to light when we stop fighting against them. And I stopped. When the door closed behind him, the house seemed to shrink. The silence that remained wasn't the same silence I usually chose. It was heavier, colder, more definitive. I walked to the kitchen without knowing exactly what I was doing. I poured water into a glass, forgot to drink it. I sat at the table and stood there, looking at my own hands, as if they could explain to me where I had gone wrong. That's where the real pain arrived. Not like a scream, not like an immediate cry, but like a constant, insistent pressure in the chest that made breathing painful. I thought of everything, in every stage of his life, in his first steps, in his fevers in the middle of the night, in the fears he had that only calmed down when I was around. I thought about how many times I've kept quiet before but for other reasons. To avoid worrying, to avoid weighing people down, to avoid being difficult. And yet, on that day, the silence had a different taste. It wasn't protection. It was waiting. I waited for him to call, to send a message saying he had reconsidered, to realize on his own what was at stake. The phone didn't ring. That's when the doubt started to gnaw at me. Had I been too proud? Would things have been different if I had spoken up? Had I confused dignity with distance? I got up from the table and went to the bedroom. I opened the drawer where I keep things I almost never touch. Old photos, tickets, small pieces of a lifetime dedicated to someone. I sat on the bed and for the first time that night, I cried. I cried softly, without sobs, without noise, like someone who doesn't want to disturb even their own pain. It wasn't just the fear of losing him. It was the fear of discovering that I had already lost him. At the same time, a part of me kept reminding myself of the promise I made in the past. The promise to never again beg for love, to never again compete for space in anyone's heart. And that tore me apart inside. Because, caught between being a mother and being a woman, I felt torn, as if any choice would be a form of loss. I spent that night barely sleeping. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation in my head, thinking about answers I didn't give, about words I swallowed. But deep down, there was a silent certainty that remained firm, even amidst the pain. If I interfered, if I pressured, if I demanded, the choice would never truly be his. And I needed the truth, even if it hurt more than any past abandonment. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a tired heart. The world outside seemed normal. Cars passing by, people going to work, life going on. And there I was, trying to accept that some answers don't come when we want them to. They come when maturity demands them. I took a deep breath, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, I don't know what his decision will be, but I know what mine was. I chose not to beg. I chose not to compete. I chose not to diminish myself in order to be chosen. And at that moment, even though I was hurt, I understood that I needed to go through all of that pain. No shortcuts, because only then would the truth come out. Even if she broke my heart in two, the day my son made his choice didn't start any differently than any other. There was no warning. There was no preparation. There wasn't that feeling you expect to have when something big is about to happen. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. I recognized the number in the same second, but I let it ring again before answering. Not out of spite, not out of pride, but because, at that moment, I knew, when I answered, nothing would ever be the same again. Mom, we need to talk. His voice was firm, not cold, not aggressive, but decisive. He came to my house. He entered as he always did, but he didn't sit down as before. He stood for a few seconds, pacing back and forth, as if organizing difficult words. I sat down. I crossed my hands in my lap. I didn't say anything. Silence returned to fill the space between us. This time, not as a test, but as acceptance. He took a deep breath and spoke. He talked about his life, his plans, the future he wanted to build. He talked about his relationship. He talked about the choices he needed to make as a man. At no point did I interrupt. Each word was like a thread being pulled from my chest. Some hurt more, others less, but they all led to the same place. Then came the phrase I knew was coming, but that we're never really ready to hear. Mom, I chose to go with her, just the way things are. There was no accusation. There was no aggression. There was no contempt. But there was something worse. The realization. I felt the ground disappear for a second. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. It was a silent emptiness, as if something inside me had simply given way. Even so, I didn't cry. I looked at him, into his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I had protected from the world. I saw the man he chose to be. That's when I understood everything. I understood that he wasn't rejecting me out of malice. I understood that he wasn't trying to hurt me. I understood that that decision said much more about who he was than about the love he felt for me. And it was at that moment that a harsh but clear truth formed within me. I hadn't lost my son. I had discovered who he was when no one was pressuring him. The silence I had maintained until then had taken on a different meaning. It was no longer waiting. It was an answer. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice firmer than I thought I was capable of. I respect your choice. He seemed surprised. Perhaps he expected a confrontation, tears, an accusation, a scene, but there wasn't. I just want you to know, I continued, that love isn't something you fight for, nor do you beg for it, nor do you demand it. He lowered his head. I didn't say anything else. There was no need, because, at that moment, something inside me clicked into place. It hurt, yes. It hurt like few things have hurt in my life. But along with the pain came a strange lucidity, a mature clarity, almost tranquil. I didn't diminish myself. I didn't humiliate myself. I didn't compete. And this, even at the cost of a relationship, preserved something I spent my whole life building, my dignity. When he left, I was alone in the room. But unlike the other night, the silence didn't crush me. He explained it to me, and I understood. That day, I didn't lose a child. I lost an expectation, an illusion, a role that no longer fit. And instead, I got something painful but true. The certainty that I did what needed to be done, even when it hurt. After that conversation, the house felt too big, not empty of furniture, empty of expectation. For many years, I lived according to a very clear role: to be a mother, to be the foundation, to be a constant presence, to be the silent priority. When that role changed, not by my choice, but by his, I had to face something I had always avoided: who I was beyond motherhood. In the first few days, it hurt even to breathe. It wasn't just homesickness. It was a kind of grief that almost no one recognizes. Grief for a bond that still exists, but not in the same way. The messages dwindled. The visits became less frequent. And even when he did come, it wasn't the same as before. I could have insisted. I could have complained. I could have competed. I could have used guilt, the past, sacrifice. But I didn't. Because, deep down, I knew any love that needs to be ripped away isn't love. It's attachment. There were days when I felt invisible, others when I felt disposable, and some when the question kept hammering away: did I make mistakes as a mother? But with time and with much silence, that question began to lose its power. I looked back at everything I did, at everything I gave up, at everything I gave without asking for anything in return. And I realized something that changed everything inside me. I did not fail. I fulfilled my role. Raising a child isn't about raising someone to stay with. It's about raising someone to choose. And he chose. Accepting this wasn't quick, nor pretty, nor easy, but it was liberating. Gradually, I began to reorganize my life. Not to forget him. It was never about that. But so as not to disappear within his story. I started doing things again that I had abandoned without realizing it. Walks alone. Readings that had been interrupted for years. Conversations that didn't revolve around him. At first, everything seemed strange. Like wearing clothes that had been stored away for too long. But little by little, I began to remember myself. I discovered that I still had small dreams. I still had desires. I still had space to exist without asking permission. When someone asked me about my son, I answered truthfully but without lengthy explanations. No defense, no justification. I learned that maturity is also about this, not needing to prove anything. He went on with his life. I went on with mine. We haven't completely drifted apart, but we also don't pretend that nothing has changed. And interestingly, it was in this new space, more honest, less dependent, that respect began to be rebuilt. Not because I gave in, but because I remained whole. Today, when I look back, I understand something that took a lifetime to make sense of. My silence was not submission. It was setting a limit. It cost me some closeness, but it gave me something much greater in return: the certainty that I didn't need to diminish myself to continue being a mother. I still love, but now, without losing myself. And that is freedom. Today, when I think about everything I've been through, I understand that the silence they judged as coldness was, in fact, a mirror that showed who was willing to stay for love and who only stayed as long as it was comfortable. I learned, in the most painful way possible, that loving is not about controlling. It's not about insisting. It's not about humiliating yourself to avoid losing. To love sometimes is to have the courage to remain silent and accept the response that comes after. Many mothers confuse love with eternal sacrifice. They believe they need to endure everything, accept everything, swallow everything, in order not to lose the bond. But there is a truth that almost no one says out loud: love that only exists when you disappear is not love. A bond that is only maintained through guilt is not healthy. My silence wasn't abandonment. It was maturity. I haven't stopped loving my son. I've stopped competing for his place. And this taught me something that I want to share with you, the listener, now. Sometimes, silence isn't absence. It's a boundary set by those who are tired of hurting themselves. If you've ever stayed silent to see the truth, if you've ever had to accept a choice that wasn't yours, if you've ever loved someone who had to leave so that you could remain whole, know this: you're not cold. You are strong. And strength often makes no noise. Now I ask you, have you ever had to remain silent to uncover the truth? Have you ever had to accept a choice that broke your heart? If this story touched you, leave a comment, like it, follow the channel. Here, we don't force love. We understand scars.